Late one night, at Prince's Los Angeles mansion, something happened that would haunt Sinéad O'Connor for decades. This was after Nothing Compares to You had made her a global superstar. After his song had given her everything. You'd think he'd be proud. You'd think he'd celebrate her success. But according to Sinéad's later accounts, Prince didn't invite her to congratulate her. Something else was waiting. Something that would turn a professional relationship into a psychological battlefield. Sinéad later described that night as one of the most terrifying experiences of her life. And the strangest part? Most people still don't know it happened. They still see Prince as the untouchable genius, the symbol of artistic freedom. But Sinéad saw something different. She saw the man behind the symbol. And what she saw changed everything. If you want to discover more untold stories from music history, subscribe to our channel and join thousands of others who are uncovering the truth behind the legends. The story begins in 1984, inside a Minneapolis recording studio where Prince was creating what would become one of the most emotionally devastating songs in pop music history. He wrote Nothing Compares to You for the Family, a side project he was producing, but the song never found its audience in that original version. When Sinéad recorded her version in 1990, she transformed the song into something extraordinary. Her voice, that haunting Irish tremor filled with genuine heartbreak, turned the track into a global phenomenon. The music video, with that single tear rolling down her shaved head, became one of the most iconic images of the decade. The song stayed at #1 for weeks. It won awards. It made Sinéad a household name overnight. She was 23 years old, raw and rebellious, and suddenly the entire world was watching her. But there was one person watching more closely than anyone else, and his feelings about her success were far more complicated than simple pride. She had grown up in an abusive household in Ireland, survived Catholic reform schools, and built armor around herself that made her almost impossible to intimidate. When she sang Nothing Compares to You, she wasn't singing Prince's pain. She was singing her own. And that distinction would become the spark that ignited everything that followed. The tension started subtly, the way most dangerous conflicts do. Prince began making comments in interviews about artists who covered his songs. Nothing direct at first, just small remarks about authenticity, about people who took credit for other people's work. Those who knew him recognized the pattern. He was circling, testing boundaries, seeing if Sinéad would respond. She didn't. She continued doing interviews where she talked about the song as if it belonged to her now, as if her interpretation had transcended the original. According to those who worked with Prince, he saw this not as artistic confidence, but as something closer to theft. The real breaking point came when Sinéad started changing lyrics during live performances, adding her own verses. Prince heard about it. And according to Sinéad and others around him, his behavior seemed to shift to something more concerning. Other artists had experienced his controlling tendencies. But they had learned to navigate his ego. Sinéad hadn't. And perhaps Prince, who had fought for decades to control his own music against record labels, saw artists altering his songs as a similar loss of creative control. Friends described him as someone who viewed his compositions as sacred, meant to be performed exactly as written. The phone calls intensified. 2 in the morning. 3 in the morning. According to Sinéad, Prince's voice was soft but loaded with implications. He never explicitly threatened her, she said. But she felt threats had been delivered. Her friends told her to change her number. Her manager told her to give him credit. Everyone told her to submit. But Sinéad had spent her childhood learning how to resist controlling men. Prince's phone calls triggered every defense mechanism she'd ever developed. The more he pushed for compliance, the more she dug in her heels. It wasn't even about the song anymore. It was about refusing to let another man control her. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Prince was hosting a party at his Los Angeles mansion, and Sinéad's name was on the list. She almost didn't go. Something about the invitation felt off. But she was young, and part of her was still curious about the man who had written the song that defined her career. Maybe if they talked face to face, they could find some common ground. She told herself she wasn't afraid of Prince.
She'd faced down worse than an egotistical musician. So she went. And the decision would reshape the rest of her life. The party was everything you'd expect from a Prince event in the early 90s. Purple lighting everywhere, washing the rooms in that signature shade. Musicians scattered throughout the mansion, some playing, some watching, everyone trying to catch the host's attention. Sinead felt out of place from the moment she arrived. Her shaved head. Simple clothes. Everyone else in purple costumes. And the way people looked at her. Like they knew something she didn't. Like they were waiting for something to happen. She realized that everyone at this party knew about the conflict between her and Prince. And they were waiting to see what would happen next. Prince ignored her. An hour passed. The anticipation worse than confrontation. She almost left. But something kept her there. When he finally approached Sinead, he didn't greet her warmly. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he asked her to follow him. Not requested. Asked in a way that made it clear refusal wasn't really an option. Other guests suddenly found reasons to look away. They went upstairs, away from the party noise, and with each step Sinead felt the atmosphere change. The purple lighting gave way to dimmer illumination. The music faded to a distant throb. It was just the two of them now, moving down a hallway that seemed to stretch longer than physics would allow. Prince opened a door and gestured for Sinead to enter. The room was small. Intimate. A private studio. The door closed behind them. According to Sinead's later accounts, he told her she was disrespecting him. That every time she performed the song her way instead of his way, she was spitting on his generosity. He told her that she owed everything to him, that without his song she'd still be nobody playing small clubs in Dublin. Sinead tried to defend herself, tried to explain that artists interpret songs differently, that's what makes music alive. But Prince wasn't interested in artistic philosophy. According to her telling, he wanted submission. He wanted her to admit that she belonged to him in some fundamental way, that her success was his success, that she had no right to independence. The conversation grew heated. And then, as Sinead would later describe, Prince did something that crossed a line she didn't even know existed until that moment. She claimed he suggested they settle their disagreement physically. Not violently, he was careful about that, but he wanted to engage in what he called a pillow fight. It sounded absurd, childish even, but according to Sinead, there was nothing playful in his tone. It was a dominance game, a way of humiliating her, of forcing her into a subordinate position while maintaining deniability. According to her version of events, Sinead refused. She told him he was being ridiculous and tried to leave the room. That's when, she alleges, Prince physically blocked the doorway. He didn't touch her, but his body language made it clear she wasn't leaving until he decided she could leave. For the first time since arriving at the party, Sinead felt genuine fear. In Sinead's telling, the minutes that followed felt like hours. Prince stood between her and the door, not speaking now, just watching her. She could hear the party continuing downstairs, a reminder that there were dozens of people just one staircase away. But somehow that made it worse. All those people, and not one of them would intervene. Sinead tried reasoning with him again, tried to find some combination of words that would de-escalate the situation. She told him she respected his songwriting genius. She told him she'd be more careful about crediting him in future performances. She said things she didn't mean, making promises she had no intention of keeping, because in that moment survival mattered more than integrity. And slowly, gradually, something in Prince's posture relaxed. He stepped away from the door. He told her she could leave. But he added one final warning that she'd remember for the rest of her life. This conversation stays between us, he said. No one needs to know what happened here. And Sinead understood the implication. If she told anyone, there would be consequences. Sinead has given different accounts over the years, sometimes adding details, sometimes leaving gaps that suggest trauma she's still processing. What's certain is that she eventually got out of that room, left the party, and drove home shaking. She didn't call the police. She didn't tell the press. In the early 90s, who would have believed her?
Prince was beloved, untouchable, a genius who could do no wrong in the public's eyes. Sinéad was the controversial one, the one who would soon tear up the Pope's picture on Saturday Night Live, the one music industry executives already considered difficult. If she'd spoken out, the narrative would have been flipped against her. So she stayed silent. And that silence aided her for years. She told close friends. Some believed her. Most didn't. Prince never publicly acknowledged any confrontation. But according to Sinéad, his hostility became obvious. Her career suffered dramatically after multiple controversies, most notably the 1992 Saturday Night Live incident that turned much of the industry against her. Whether Prince played a role in radio stations and award shows distancing themselves from her remains a subject of debate, but Sinéad felt his influence in her career's decline. The relationship between a songwriter and the artist who makes their song famous is supposed to be symbiotic. Both benefit. Both acknowledge what the other brought to the collaboration. But according to those who knew Prince, he couldn't see it that way. The fact that her version was objectively more successful than anything he could have done with the song himself only made it worse. For someone whose entire identity was built on being the most talented person in any room, that was difficult to accept. And Sinéad believed he wanted to make her pay for that. Decades passed. Prince died in 2016. Fentanyl overdose. Then Sinéad spoke. Some called her cruel for speaking about a man who could no longer defend himself. Others finally understood. She described that night. The fear. The control. The domination. And the industry that she felt had protected him instead of her. Fans defended him. Called her a liar. But other women who had worked with Prince spoke up, describing experiences they found controlling or uncomfortable. A more complex picture emerged. Genius and troubled individual. Both true. Prince never publicly responded to these allegations, and those closest to him offered conflicting accounts. Some described him as demanding but never threatening. Others acknowledged his controlling tendencies while emphasizing his generosity to countless artists. Sinéad didn't want to destroy his legacy. She wanted truth. She wanted the industry to reckon with how it handles power imbalances. She wanted to stop carrying the silence alone. Speaking about it publicly didn't erase the trauma. But it did distribute the weight of it. It made the experience real in a way that years of private suffering never could. Today, when people listen to Nothing Compares to You, most still hear it as a pure expression of heartbreak. They don't think about the conflict between Prince and Sinéad. They just feel the emotion of the song itself, which is exactly as it should be. Great art transcends the messy circumstances of its creation. But knowing the backstory adds layers to the listening experience. Prince's legacy will always be complicated. He was a revolutionary musician who changed the sound of popular music. He was a fierce advocate for artists' rights who fought against record label exploitation. Multiple people who worked with him also described experiences they found controlling or intimidating. These contradictions don't cancel each other out. They coexist, forcing us to hold multiple truths simultaneously. That's uncomfortable. But real people don't work that way. Confronting that reality is part of how we grow as a culture. For Sinéad O'Connor, the journey from silence to speaking out was long and painful. She paid a price for challenging Prince's narrative. Some radio stations stopped playing her music. Some fans turned against her. But she also found solidarity with other survivors of industry difficulties. She found younger artists who thanked her for speaking openly about the complexities of accepting gifts from powerful men. And she found a kind of peace in finally telling a truth she'd carried for too long. The story of Prince and Sinéad O'Connor isn't just about two individuals. It's about how creative industries handle power imbalances. It's about how genius gets used as an excuse for difficult behavior. It's about how women who speak up about mistreatment often get labeled differently than men who commit that mistreatment. These patterns repeat across generations, in every art form, in every corner of the entertainment world. What could have been different?
If Prince had seen Sinead's interpretation of his song as a collaboration rather than theft. If he had celebrated her success instead of, according to her account, resenting it. If the music industry had created systems for addressing power imbalances before they escalated. Any of those changes might have prevented the night that haunted Sinead for decades. But none of those changes happened. Prince had already achieved everything a musician could dream of achieving. Multiple #1 albums. Sold-out world tours. A place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The respect of every serious musician on the planet. He didn't need to dominate anyone to prove his genius. His body of work had already done that. But ego and control aren't rational. They're about what you think you deserve, what you believe you're entitled to, what you cannot tolerate losing. And according to Sinead's account, that psychological reality drove what happened that night. The night at Prince's mansion, according to Sinead's telling, represented a choice. In her account, he chose intimidation over celebration. Control over collaboration. His ego over her autonomy. That choice rippled forward through decades, affecting not just the two of them but the entire music industry's understanding of how power works and what accountability looks like. Sinead survived that night, and she survived the years of silence that followed, and she survived the backlash when she finally spoke. But survival isn't the same as justice. The full truth of what happened in that room remains known only to two people, one of whom is no longer alive to tell his side. And the music industry still hasn't fully reckoned with the truths her story reveals. Until it does, the patterns will continue, protected by talent, enabled by silence, and perpetuated by an industry that too often values commercial success over human dignity. Every generation eventually collides with the same uneasy question: what do we do when the artist and the art become inseparable? When the songs that shaped our lives carry shadows we'd rather avoid? When someone whose genius transformed culture also caused harm that cannot be ignored? People respond differently. Some stop listening altogether, choosing to align their values with their playlists. Others separate the art from the artist, insisting that appreciating the creation doesn't mean endorsing the creator. Many exist somewhere in between, trying to hold both admiration and accountability at once. Prince's music will outlive everyone reading these words. Purple Rain will echo at weddings and funerals for decades. Nothing Compares to You will continue to break hearts long after the truth behind it fades. Maybe that's what art does, transcends the flawed humans who made it. But maybe remembering those flaws is part of honoring the full story. Not to cancel, but to understand. To choose awareness over comfort. Sinead O'Connor carried a truth few wanted to hear. She survived the night at the mansion, but what came after was its own kind of violence: the blacklisting, the ridicule, the dismissal of her pain as hysterics from a difficult woman. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to destroy a legend. It was to warn others, to say that even a gift from a genius can come with a hidden cost. The industry has shifted since that night in 1991. The Me Too movement cracked open a silence that had protected power for too long. More artists now feel able to speak without immediate exile. But the work is far from finished. As long as genius is worshipped above accountability, as long as success grants immunity, harm will continue to hide behind brilliance. So what do we do with that knowledge? We listen differently. We let admiration coexist with awareness. We allow ourselves to love a song while acknowledging the pain surrounding its creation. We resist the urge to choose either blind loyalty or total rejection. Reality often lives in the tension between the two. This isn't just a story about Prince or Sinead O'Connor. It's about us, about the choices we make when faced with uncomfortable truth. Can we hold multiple realities at once? Can we accept that a person can change music forever and still be responsible for harm? Both can be true. Both deserve space in the conversation. If this made you think, question, or feel discomfort, then the story did its job. These conversations matter not to destroy legacies, but to build better ones. If we believe that art can change the world, then we must also believe that accountability can change it too. The music will keep playing. The arguments will continue.
And somewhere between celebration and critique, between love for the art and respect for those who were hurt, lies a truth worth holding, not because it's easy, but because it's honest.